Hi guys, how are you? My name is Jorge Grant and I'm going to explain about a video project about the American society discriminates Mexican immigrant and Mexican American. Okay, according to my thesis, the discrimination against Mexican and by Americans and non-Americans systems from historical biases, economic insecurities, and cultural stereotypes. The discrimination manifests itself in many ways, including bias in immigration policies, workplace inequality, social stigma, and media portrayals that reinforce negative stereotypes, ultimately creating systematic barriers to social and economic advancement for Mexican individuals and communities. But for example, we are going to explain in this video. So, what is the historical context and well to try to explain how was created this illogical discrimination against Mexican people. Um, and okay, so from the late 19th century to the 21st century, Mexican Americans have faced various forms of discrimination. In the early 20th century, anti Mexican sentiment was fueled by economic competition and racial prejudice. The 1930s saw the Mexican repatriation, where hundreds of thousands were deported or pressured to leave, despite many being U.S. citizens. During the post-World War II era, the Bracero program allowed temporary labor but often resulted in exploitation and poor working conditions. The 1960s and 1970s saw the rise of the Chicano movement, which fought against systematic racism and for civil rights. In recent decades, Mexicans have continued to face challenges related to immigration policy. Hi guys, how are you? Well, what's the main point of distinction between Mexican people and American? Well, in the United States, many language Mexican brings into play of historical social, including long-standing stereotypes, economic competition, and immigration patterns. The historical context of the Mexican-American War and subsequent treaties like the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo led to a significant Mexican population. Uh, Subsequent treaties like the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo significant Mexican population coming to the U.S., which sometimes fostered resentment and prejudice. Additionally, the visibility of Mexicans and Mexican Americans, driving by immigration rates and near representation, has made them prominent targets for discrimination compared to related groups, such as Argentinians or Colombians, Brazilian, Chileans, Spaniards, or Contra Cubans, Puerto Ricans, and Latin Americans. Stereotypes about Mexicans, those related to labor and immigration, contribute to this discrimination, often portraying them early as illegal immigrants or economic threats. Moreover, language and cultural differences also play a role with Mexicans more prevalent in the media and public discourse, which can sometimes reinforce stereotypes in contrast to other communities, such as Filipinos or Chile, are often less visible or targeted due to their small number of different migration patterns, which results in less forced prejudice and discrimination. This really highlights how very effective with historical legacy in media portrayal and migration patterns here different Latino groups in the US. So I'm going to show next videos that I picked up from a UCI student. Okay, so how do you think about that American slavery for um, other Latino Hispanic groups in Mexico? why do they think about that? So what is the next strategy or solution? They were government or president. So I hope so you will be enjoy this part of the video and then start explaining that in the next slide or something. The historical context and a historical present nowadays. So what is the main problem between Mexican society that formally will be unfortunately independent of the American?
Is okay. If you were the American government, what is the best solution to avoid those discrimination?
I think sometimes it's hard to change people's minds when they're already adults.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that it's like impossible, but I do think starting like young and like having like kids be educated on people who might look different than them and come from different backgrounds, so they're more tolerant, respectful, and open. And like having not banning like books that kind of promote other people's perspectives, I think that would be a good one of many solutions to the problem.
Okay, got it.
Probably jobs, yes. I don't know about schools as much, but I do think there's a lot of unfair discrimination. Yeah.
And you?
I agree. I don't know about schools as much, just because where we live, there are a lot of Mexican students, but I can imagine there's some school discrimination.
Okay. Other question. So, what do you think about the most of the American people, according to my experience? So, they prefer the other Latin American groups as Argentinians, Spanish, Ecuadorians, Brazilians over the Mexican people, and they won't suffer too much discrimination in other ways rather than Mexican people. What do you think about that?
I think that's a good question. I think depends on who you're talking about. I think many Americans in the middle of the country don't have a lot of exposure to anyone with a Spanish accent, and so I don't think that they know the difference really, or even are able to distinguish. But I think it's true in some ways that when people do know the difference, they may have different perceptions. Yeah.
You?
I agree.
Okay. Other questions. What do you think about the difference between Latin American, and Hispanic people? What do you can you make sure the difference between those terms or terminologies?
I mean, I think that
Also Latin American people. But I would say it's something that people in the U.S. did like make up calling Latin American people Hispanic, just because we weren't
Right.
trying to categorize them.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, do you think about it's about the question economy, migration, because most of the Mexican people they are not necessarily have a higher education or documents to prove their residency in the U.S. That's
But what's the question? Do
So-
you think there's
So that's the main reason that most of the American people prefer other Latin American people to get along instead to get along with the Mexican people.
I think it's just based on ignorance. I don't think there's anything that makes sense about it. To be honest with you, I mean that's one. It's a possibility. I think there's also historical things. I think the right wingers in the U.S. and popular media make a lot. Like Trump has not helped things, making stupid statements about a whole country worth of people that are not true. So I think that's really added to people's ignorance.
Yeah. Hi. So, sorry, but I don't know much about the discrimination against Mexican population here in the States. But I would say from past experience, I say the racial discrimination against minority groups has become more like explicit just over the internet or on the street. I would agree that, and I think since this year's election year, I think if Trump gonna win, I think we will face more intense racial discrimination in the future.
Okay, other question. When you're thinking about, okay, not only Mexican, for example, have you heard about Argentinians, Brazilians, and Spaniards? Why most of the American people don't discriminate the rest of the Latin American people as the Mexican people? What do you think about?
You mean the spectrum? Like, you mean they don't discriminate against other
Latin American groups?
Latino, Hispanic?
Do you think the American government or will be find a solution by the illegal immigration with the Mexican people?
I mean, that entirely depends on the politicians that we vote in. Obviously, the prominent thing is the presidential election coming up. Depending on who wins, like American politics can go either way in terms of like finding a solution for immigration.
Okay, last question. What do you think about the American government? It's only discriminate only with the Mexican people, but they don't want to discriminate with the rest of Latin America, as Argentinian, Spanish, or Cuban people. What do you think about that?
I think it's partly due because a lot of upper class Americans or politicians, they kind of discriminate as all Latin Americans as Mexican. They're not really differentiating like country to country. They all just see Spanish people or Latin American people as under one country. It's like seeing Asians as all from China when that's obviously not true. So while the discrimination seems to only be against Mexican Americans, I can guarantee that it encompasses way more. It's just that races don't really differentiate, between Latin American people.
Do you think that Argentinians or Cuban, and so they have a less discrimination, receive less discrimination rather than Mexican and Central American?
I'm not too sure on that, I'm gonna be honest. Maybe not. I don't have enough information to say.
Right. Okay, so what do you think about the discrimination, I guess, with the Mexican people or Mexican American inside California in the factories or work?
I mean, obviously, with any normal person, I think it's pretty deplorable. I come from an immigrant background as well. My family came over from Vietnam, so I can understand the plight of Mexican Americans coming over, or Mexicans coming over and being immigrants, being discriminated against as a minority, even though they are pretty prominent here in Southern California. Obviously, California is a pretty safe state overall for Mexican immigrants. I think it's a sanctuary state. And I personally don't have an issue with immigrants. Again, my family background is of immigrants. Everyone's coming here for a better life, better, living situations, finding better work opportunities to support their families. And as long as they're just there to, support themselves and achieve, quote unquote, the American dream, it's, I find this discrimination to be kind of disgusting. I mean, there's no need for that. Everyone's human after all.
All right.
Obviously, with any normal person, I think it's pretty deplorable. I come from an immigrant background as well. My family came over from Vietnam, so I can understand the plight of Mexican Americans coming over, or Mexicans coming over and being immigrants, being discriminated against as a minority, even though they are pretty prominent here in Southern California. Obviously, California is a pretty safe state overall for Mexican immigrants. I think it's a sanctuary state. And I personally don't have an issue with immigrants. Again, my family background is of immigrants. Everyone's coming here for a better life, better, living situations, finding better work opportunities to support their families. And as long as they're just there to, support themselves and achieve, quote unquote, the American dream, it's, I find this discrimination to be kind of disgusting. I mean, there's no need for that. Everyone's human after all.
All right.